It's now 4 o'clock, so I will call the meeting to order. I want to say that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest, first of all? There being none, I'll go to the consent items. I've been told that we're going to pull items 2.1, 2.4, and 2.12, and there will be just a question on 2.9. Is there anything else that anyone wishes to have pulled? Yes, Councillor Lewis.
Not that I need it pulled, but I do want to just ask a question, make a comment about 2.10.
It is being pulled in any event. Councillor Van Holst?
And I'm sorry, what were the numbers you said?
What were the words I said?
The numbers, 2.5?
2.1 is being pulled, 2.4 is being pulled, and 2.12 are being pulled, and there's a question on 2.9.
Okay, thank you. If you pull 2.5 and 2.12.
All right. Anything else? So we'll vote on 2.2, 2.3, 2.6 through 2.11, and there'll be a question, as part of that, there'll be a question on 2.9. Somebody prepared to move that? Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Any further discussion? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff on item 2.10, the amendments to traffic and parking bylaw. A couple of these are affecting residents in my ward. I want to thank staff for the work that they did in coordinating a neighborhood survey and getting that public feedback. One of the questions that I was actually asked by a constituent to raise today was with regard to the change of the yield sign on Robbins Hill. And the concern was that the traffic on that stretch of road, it's large. It's industrial traffic. It's trucks and things that are carrying heavy loads. And the question was simply, is it possible for that stop sign installation to be a large size stop sign because the larger vehicles create some visibility issues? So I had a constituent ask, so I'm putting that to staff to see if that's possible.
Someone answer that from staff?
Through the chair, that's something we can look at. Typically, we look at larger signs where there's high speed, but we'll take a look at this one as well.
Thank you. Is that fine? And Councillor Pelosa, I think you had a question about 2.9.
I did, thank you. And through the chair, in regards to 2.9 on today's agenda, in regards to the acoustic fiber optic monitoring in our agreement for 2019, just wondering if we keep going with the same supplier, which is fine, if it's a matter of us, if their technology can only be serviced by them, or we're being held hostage to only that contract going forward. Just wondering for some clarification on that point through the chair.
Through the chair, we have found that it is a good value for this contract. It is a proprietary technology, so they're the only ones that can maintain it and to operate it.
Anything further on the consent items that have not been pulled? All right, then it's been moved and seconded. I'll call the motion. Sorry, yes, Deputy Mayor, did you have anything? No?
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
And pulling item 2.1, I think that's Councillor Lehman. You wanted to speak to that?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions for staff through you. Just want to know what are the plans for west of Wickerson and south of Southdale?
Sorry, could you clarify the limits? Are you talking Southdale between Wickerson and West Elborn? Okay. We took an initial look at that section of road when we started this environmental assessment, and it's, as you may know, it's a very challenging stretch of road with respect to grades. It's perched on the side of a very steep slope, has a water course at the bottom. So we started out at a very high level and looked at significant realignments of Southdale Road and determined that that wasn't feasible. So we've decided to leave that section of road to a higher level evaluation. So perhaps in the next transportation master plan, reviewing the broader network, recognizing that improvements to that section of Southdale are very challenging. There have been some in the past. We'll continue to maintain the road, but in the next TMP, look at maybe a higher order solution to it.
Through the chair, I'm just curious, it's on the edge of the city. We have no immediate plans to have increased building going around there. A lot of money. Why at this particular time, that portion of the city at the expense maybe of other unsafe roads that are more heavily used?
Okay, so through the chair, now I assume we're talking about the project recommendations in question east of Wickerson and Southdale. So the rationale for this project is primarily to improve safety. The road has very significant grades, sags and crests that limit sight lines. We've had a higher collision rate there. And as traffic volumes grow due to developments to the north and volumes on Southdale are growing significantly, it brings forward concerns about operations and safety. So typically on a project that doesn't upgrade, it doesn't widen to 4 lanes, we wouldn't have to do an environmental assessment. But due to the complexity of the improvements contemplated here, the need for property and widening beyond the right-of-way, it triggers the need for an environmental assessment. But so it's driven by growth needs, growing traffic volumes due to organic growth in the broader area, but also primarily by safety.
One final question. I understand it's a vertical adjustment, not a horizontal one. What's the need for property acquisition then, if that's the case?
The property acquisition is limited to strip widenings along the edge of the right-of-way, and these are driven by when we fill sags, fill the low parts of the road. The higher fill slopes then stretch out farther. There's a bigger footprint, so it ends up encroaching beyond the right-of-way. The reverse scenario is when we try to flatten the tops of crests. Those are typically in they have cut slopes on either side of the road, and when we lower the road to flatten it out, it pushes those cut slopes back. And again, there's a property need. These often extend beyond the current property lines. So that's the rationale for the property acquisitions, strip widenings.
Anything further on this matter? Someone prepared to move this matter? Councillor Van Hol, seconder. Councillor Lehman, any further discussion? Call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
Moving now to item 2.4, contract award tender, downtown sewer separation phase 2. Is that Councillor Lehman again? Yes, go ahead.
Through the chair, I just noticed that in funding, the target for the city fixing the sewers it's contingent on federal and provincial funding, yet I don't see any federal provincial funding on this project. How are we supposed to go ahead with that if it's contingent on other governments' funding?
Through the chair, unfortunately, there's no one here that's from finance. My understanding is that we do have the appropriate funding for this account, for this project to move forward. So I can confirm that. I can speak with finance about that before council.
Counselor, is that something you can do offline, or would you? Okay, thank you very much. Any further comments or questions? You have one more? Sure.
Well, at any time, will the entire street be shut down, York Street?
Through the chair, portions of York Street will be closed. However, access to any of the major services along the road will have access at all times. So that any of the businesses, the Via Rail Station will have access, but there may be portions of the road that are closed at any one time. We're working with the contractor to try to minimize any of those impacts.
So just to be clear, will there always be a through lane of traffic at all times on York Street?
Through the chair, no, there will be points in York Street where there'll be completely, there won't be access to go all the way through. And that was similar to what happened in 2018 as part of the project work.
Anything further? Somebody prepared to move this? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Anything further? Call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
Moving on to item 2.5, which is an agreement extension with Trojan Technologies. I believe Councillor Van Holst, you asked for this to be pulled.
Yes, thank you very much. So, this is certainly a good and supportable thing. In return for letting them use this facility, we're getting some benefit from Trojan Technologies. I would note they're not the only water treatment company we have in London. I wonder if anyone else showed interest in this, or even the universities for research. Is there anybody else who could use this at the same time, or would prefer to use it? So that's my question to the chair.
Through the chair, this specific facility, no, we haven't had interest in the past, but we do have opportunities through Western University, who manages a space in the Greenway Treatment Plant. And that space is actually open to anyone who would like to partner with them in the Southern Ontario Water Consortium. So we also have Trojan using some of the bays in that space, but also other companies have the opportunity to be able to use that space.
Okay.
Anything further, Councillor?
I don't think so, so I'm happy to move that. Yeah.
You're moving it. Anybody prepared to second it? Councillor Lehman, any further comments or questions? Call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
And the final consent item to be pulled is item 2.12, the Red Light Camera Program 2018 Annual Report. I got a couple of councillors wanted to talk about that. Councillor Lewis, were you interested in talking about that?
I was, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I appreciate this great information. I will fully confess that when the idea of red light cameras came up, I was a little skeptical, but seeing the reports, seeing the reduction in right-angle collisions, I frankly hope to see fewer fines issued in the future, because I hope that drivers start obeying those red lights a little more frequently. I just wondered, because this is a situation where other enforcement options are being considered, in particular automated speed enforcement, and I know that there's a lot of interest in my ward around school zones. I just wonder if staff could provide a brief update as to where we are with other automated enforcement technologies, in particular the red light or the automated speed enforcement, if that's possible. And I know I'm catching you without really any forewarning on this. So if you don't have the information available, I understand.
Through the chair, council had approved for staff to participate as part of the Automated Speed Enforcement Working Group. We've been working with the other municipalities. In particular, the City of Toronto is taking up the greater lead on this project, but all the municipalities are having input. City of Toronto has been testing a few pieces of equipment. The request for proposals is being prepared as we speak, and will be going out probably late spring with contract award probably in the fall of this year. Once that contract's been out and is closed, then we would excuse me, bring it forward to council at that time to decide whether they want to proceed into the program or not. So, but we are working with the municipalities, and it's actually quite a large undertaking. It's run very similar to the red light camera. In it, that the city, all the infractions are processed in one location. Same idea with the automated speed enforcement.
And Councillor Lehman, I think you wanted to ask something?
I share Councillor Lewis's apprehension of turning into a big brother state here. However, the reduction of risk of getting T-boned at an intersection somewhat compensates for that. What I'm curious about is that we see incidences decreasing, but at the same rate as all intersections. And I wonder if there's any opinion through you, Chair, that the staff might have on why that is. Is it red light cameras having an effect, or would that have happened naturally without red light cameras, or because people are more aware, because red light cameras are in place, that they're driving safer all over the city? I was just wondering if opinion.
Are you able to provide an opinion? Which is more than a guess.
Lawyer. Oh, sorry.
I can provide some background on our Vision Zero road safety strategy. And, a lot of these, the measures are hard to tie back to one particular action. And our road safety strategy and Vision Zero practices encompass that, and that they encompass the enforcement actions like this, but also engineering. So the way we design our roads and specific targeted redesign of streets, and also education. And we have very good partners both within the corporation and externally on the Middlesex London Road Safety Committees that are good with the education portions. So we've really taken a multi-pronged approach to this. And for example, the red light camera program is supplemented legislatively. We have to do an awareness and education campaign with it, so that that this, to help the safety benefits be achieved. And so that there's been a lot of action in that over the past 4 years since we completed the road safety strategy. And the broader collision results across the network are also showing a similar downward trend. So I think with respect to red light cameras, hopefully there is some spillover to all red light running offenses. But across the network, we also measure severe collisions, which are categorized by any collision causing an injury or a fatality. And in the road safety strategy had targets, for reduction targets over the term of the strategy. And we're pleased to say that we're exceeding those targets and seeing positive trends such as the graph in the report.
Anything further? Somebody prepared to move this matter? Oh, you have something further? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So a few questions through the chair. My first one I think the answer is no, but is there a way that we can split out the injuries from the fatalities that seems like an important distinction?
We can. Statistically, the number of fatalities is very small. So trying to identify trends just using fatalities would probably be futile just by the small sample size. So that is why they're typically lumped in with injuries, because then we have a much larger sample size that we can measure trends more effectively.
Okay, I think it'd be worth knowing what the, maybe not as a percent, but certainly when the absolute values are put in there, the number, it's worthwhile, even in a table, so we can see what, because the fatalities, of course, that's a very significant effect, and if we see that, we can see, again, it's another measure of seeing how much safer things are getting. So I would find it valuable to do that. So the
You have
next
another
thing-
question? or-
Yes, I have a few more
Okay.
questions, thanks. Now, I noticed the piece of information we didn't have, although I followed up with staff to get it. When you put in a red light camera, you expect the right angle collisions to go down, but you also expect the rear end collisions to go up. And I asked if that was the case, and according to their information, it had gone up. But another good news story is that the percent of injuries in those red lights also went down. So we're seeing a broad scale reduction in injuries altogether. So I think that's important and good news as well. But I think it'd be interesting to see the information of the right angle collisions in with the total and the rear end, because that's sort of the drawback we expect from this. I also noticed that in the table on page 132, where we looked at the totals, the average per day, the 1.6 figure, the 6,342 infractions in total for all the time, and we said 1.6, so I think that's the average per day per light, but maybe that, I'm wondering why that wasn't just the total of the averages for the average total.
Yeah, the 1.6 average is represents, yeah, I guess it's the total name in that row maybe is misrepresenting the average column. The 1.6 is intended to be an average of all the averages, so a network average of all of our red light camera locations.
Okay, so I think it adds up to about, was it 9 or 10? Okay, so, but we're certainly getting a number of around at least about 10 a day from this, or over, well, certainly maybe 1.6 from each one. So they seem to be paying for themselves, which is good. In terms of covering the costs of this, which was one of my concerns at the beginning, because it's a fairly expensive technology, but it is covering its cost. Can I ask through the chair to our staff, the red light, or I should say, not the red light, but the automated speed technology, is that a similar cost to this one, or are those technologies somewhat less expensive to deploy?
Through the chair, I don't have the exact numbers for the automated speed enforcement, but they are, while similar, they're still different technologies. With the red light camera, it's a fixed location. Automated speed enforcement, we envision, particularly in London, that we would have multiple locations, but not a camera for every spot. So we would rotate the cameras around. So that's some additional costs that you don't have with the red light camera. The processing, that sort of thing, those costs would remain the same. But the other thing to keep in mind in both of these is that it's really, they don't like to call it a lease, but we're sort of renting the equipment. We don't own it at the end of the day, at the end, at the end of the contract. The equipment goes back and it is the responsibility of the vendor. So we've amortized our costs over the 5 years. But I would expect similar costs, but, I would also at the same time, some additional higher costs for the speed enforcement.
All right, if you have another question, Counselor, I'm going to go to someone else. Is that all right? Okay, I'm going to go to Deputy Mayor Helmer, who hasn't asked anything yet.
Just a couple of comments. One, really glad to see the report. We were hoping for this kind of reduction in injuries and these kind of collisions, and at least in the initial data, that seems to be what's happening, which is great. I just hope it holds up, because these are very serious collisions that really hurt people, and in some cases result in fatalities. So really glad to see it going in the right direction. It's a hard thing to move the needle on some of these collisions, and I know it requires a lot of different things, but I'm glad that this is getting some results. I also think the table that shows the locations and the average per day shows how futile it is to try and solve this problem in a different way. So when we were discussing the red light cameras, there were some folks in the community who said, well, you should just put police officers out there and they can, catch people when they run red lights. Well, the worst one of these intersections is 3.5 per day on average. Imagine having somebody there just waiting for someone to run the red light. So it happens regularly, but it's not, every hour or anything like that. It's hard to target it with a person. The automated way is the best way of deterring it. And I think this is showing how effective this kind of program can be. My only complaint, of course, about the cameras is that they're quite large and they kind of interrupt the streetscape, especially near Banting House. But I think it's worth it considering how many tickets were given out at Queens and Adelaide, where that one is covering. So.
And Councillor Lewis, you had something else?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief, and since Deputy Mayor Helmer's here, I note that the intersection with the highest number of infractions is at the edge of his ward, and the second highest number is in my ward. So I think I'm going to challenge my constituents to see if we can keep our number under yours, Deputy Mayor Helmer. And I know that you and I have both chatted about the fact that this has altered our own driving behavior, so that's a good thing, I think, all around. I just wanted to take the opportunity to say to staff, thank you not only for the work on the red light camera project, but on the Vision Zero initiative and all the work that you do around roads, road maintenance. One of the things I've learned very quickly is that I'm probably badgering Mr. McCrae and the folks under him more than any other department in the city, because people really do care about their roads and road safety. So I will continue to badger you, but I just wanted to say to you and to your whole team, thank you for all the work that's gone into this and that you will continue to do, because people do appreciate it.
Councillor Van Holst, back to you.
Thank you. Just want to respond to Deputy Mayor Helmer's comment. Of course, if we were just trying to prevent these right-angled collisions with the red light cameras, they certainly do the job. However, my concern, and I think I still have it, is that altogether this whole program finds 14.4 infractions a day, whereas, and it costs us for $148,000 in expenses. I think that number of police officers would could probably prevent more than 14.4 infractions, or get 14.4 infractions, certainly more than that. And also, just having a police car near an intersection has a very deterrent effect as well on the behavior of drivers. So this is a large cost for what we're getting. I would like to see in the next iteration the price of the technology come down, which is often the case. But I still wonder if the police officers overall could do a better job. But those are my comments. Thanks.
Any other comments? Just briefly on the resource issue, I think the valid points have been raised about police resources. The one thing I point out, of course, is we can't measure the deterrence value, which is not necessarily the people who got tickets is the only measure of how effective it is. There's also all the other people who have been deterred from making that run on a red light because they see the large red light cameras. So I think we have to be careful of what we do with the statistics. So that's the only thing I would say. Is anybody prepared to move this matter? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Anything further? Call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
And moving on to the items for direction. The first matter is agenda item 4.1, street light local improvements process. I didn't hear that there was going to be a presentation. I didn't think so. So I'll turn it over to the committee for any questions. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. So this issue has come up a number of times in my ward where people would like to see streetlights and for the purposes of reducing crime. There's also very old neighborhoods, whereas now in a new neighborhood, these things are put in automatically. These haven't been there. And also in some cases, it's rather low-income areas, so their ability or willingness to pay isn't there. And so although I can see that we're offering to cover some of the cost, I wonder if we shouldn't have a warranted streetlight program where we do try to fill in some of these areas at the city's cost, or perhaps we have a strategy where it's based somewhat on assessment value as well, because that would link the residents' ability to pay with the cost of the project. So that's one consideration I might like to see us include.
Anything further? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's certainly a concern in my ward as well. Pretty much every street in the Nelson Park neighborhood is reliant on the old carriage light style front yard lights that are maintained and provided power by the owner's expense, not by the city's, whereas newer neighborhoods, of course, these are automatic. I appreciate the recommendation in the report of a 50-50 cost sharing recommendation, recognizing that property owners benefit from streetlights as well as the broader public. Although I do wonder if the broader public doesn't perhaps benefit a little bit more than an individual property owner. I would like to see this move forward, but I would like to see us focus on the 50% and the 33% property owner costs in the strategic plan. I think we should narrow our focus a little bit here. I think it's not fair to expect 100% of it to be on the property owner. I also think it's not fair really to expect 100% of it to be on the city, because the property owner does realize some benefit. So I would like to put forward a motion that the recommendation is that the 50% cost sharing with abutting property owners be considered in the strategic plan. I would like to move that the staff recommendation of 50% cost sharing also include the 1/3 property owner cost sharing for consideration alongside other investment priorities in the upcoming 2020 to 2023 multi-year budget process. So essentially, we're taking the staff recommendation and just adding in the 33% cost sharing as well as the 50% cost sharing.
So you're moving an amendment, and is there a seconder for that? Councillor Van Holst. All right. So now that that's been moved and seconded, any discussion? And this is on the amendment to the staff recommendation. Councillor Helmer, or Deputy Mayor Helmer, sorry.
Thank you. I think I understand from the amendment that the 100% covered by the city would be off the table then in terms of the business cases. So when it gets to council, I won't support that. I agree with Councillor Van Holst that I think we need to look at that option. I think it may make more sense to go slower with the program with the same kind of capital budget and sort of slowly build out the areas that get streetlights than it is to set the threshold for the property owner contribute to a point where people don't participate. We've seen that with a couple of programs where it's just set too high and then the uptake is not high. The capital budget goes unspent. We're not solving the problem. And then we have to adjust it later. So unlike when we did it with the sump pump program, for example, the weeping tile disconnection, some of these things where we've set it lower, and we're concerned that private operators would kind of take advantage of a really generous subsidy, that they would be doing work that maybe doesn't need to happen. Streetlights are different, you know, and so I think they're more like sidewalks than they are some other things. And so I'd like to see us at least look at that option in the business case.
Thank you. Anything further on the amendment? Councillor Lewis?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I would be more than happy to leave the 100% city cost in there. So we would only be eliminating the top two options from the table. Because I certainly hear what Councillor Helmer's, Deputy Mayor Helmer is saying, and I've told him in the past I'm always open to being persuaded, and he's persuaded me that it's worth at least considering.
All right, so where are we now on your motion then?
We are looking at considering 50%, 33%, and 100% city.
So you would like all those options to be available in the budget? Budgeting process?
In this strategic plan, as indicated in the staff recommendation.
Okay. The staff recommendation doesn't talk about.
Oh, sorry, multi-year budget process, yes.
Do you want it in the strategic plan, or do you want it?
No, multi-year budget,
All right.
sorry. I
Okay.
misspoke there.
All right, so we'll change that. And is the seconder still willing to second that? Councillor Van Holst, are you still willing to second that with the change?
Yes.
All right. Then I think we can still continue the discussion on the amendment. Anybody further on the amendment? All right, so we're going to pull it up so you can see it, and then we'll vote. What we're going to do is just change the motion.
You should be able to see it.
Should be up, so you're able to see it. I don't know where, but I'll find it.
Current item.
Current item. Current item is where it is. Where is it? The what?
Just my comment. What I did like about this is that the street decided if they wanted it or not. You know, they kick in some money. We wanted, I think probably the amount of money prevented a lot of people from going along with it. But, you know, while some streets have, you know, the street lamps, and maybe that's not desired by some, but there might be a lot of streets that's the character of the street. And for the city to come in and throw up big, bright street lamps, maybe the street doesn't want it. So that's just a comment. I think it's important, whatever direction we go with the long-term plan, that be included, that the street decides, not the city decides on what that character of the street's going to be.
Can I just ask staff, would that be the practice in your experience? I know it isn't with sidewalks. And if it's not something that's been contemplated yet, that's fine, but I didn't know if there'd been any discussion at the staff level about whether it would become if it was 100% city funded, would city then take over and say, you're getting lights whether you want them or not?
Part of the rationale behind the staff recommendation of some cost sharing is to ensure a majority buy-in from the street property owners, so directly in line with Councillor Lehman's thinking. And a lower cost sharing, like a 1/3 property owner cost sharing would achieve that. If it was 100% city cost, that wouldn't, essentially that wouldn't be a local improvement process. It would be managed, I guess, we haven't totally thought this through, but most likely similar to the warranted sidewalk program, whereby we would prioritize based on a number of factors, but it would probably be request driven, but there may need to be some sort of a survey of property owners. We'd have to think through how we'd manage that, because we'd be very, very open to complaints afterwards from property owners that didn't like it. So again, that was the rationale behind some sort of cost sharing, and we're open to different levels.
Thank you. And so just for the committee, I think having further debate about the different options will be something we can do at the budget process. So further tinkering and long discussion about what's better this may not be the best place for it. So is there anything further, Councillor Pelosa, sorry.
Thank you, and through the chair, a question for staff, actually 2 questions. What is the actual cost per streetlight in its entirety? And I'll ask my next question after that.
Actually, as in the report, we worked it out as a per meter. And off the top of my head, I can't recall the cost. If I remember, depending on the fixture, you're looking at $500 to $1,000 for the fixture, the pole, and the underground wiring. So, but it works out to, like what we said, $300 per meter of road.
I'm just looking to know how many meters per road does it take to cover the cost of a streetlight?
So the spacing that we'd be looking at would be, typically it's every other lot. So, or sorry, every other lot line. So if you have a 10 meter frontage, you would have one every 20 meters. So that's where the cost will vary depending on the size of the lot. If larger lots, we would be using fewer fixtures. So the cost will vary from from street to street. I'm not sure if I'm really answering the question, but.
Sorry. Thank you. And through the chair, I would not consider that a complete answer that I was looking for, recognizing that some units are closer together, some properties have more frontage, and I'm not sure if part of that cost is considering both sides of the street benefiting from the one street lamp, and certainly some streets have lights on one side and not the other, and it's a mix in the city. I would just look for clarification going forward if we can get that number to come back to us. And my second question.
Can I just, before we go there, Deputy Mayor Helmer, can you help with this particular issue?
I hope so. Hopefully I don't make it worse, but if it's one every 2 lots and the property owner's share is $1,800, roughly speaking, $3,600 is the cost of putting in one street fixture, right? Because they're dividing it up across the properties, and there's basically one every 2 lot lines. So, $1,800 is the cost that one property owner is going to put in if they're 100% property owner. So $3,600, roughly speaking. I think that's the answer.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you.
And your next, you have another question?
I do.
I love math.
So thank you for the clarification through Deputy Helmer. My understanding prior to this was they are more expensive than $3,600, because certainly I have full streets as well in my ward who want them. If we're looking at doing a 50% owner split or more of a split, I would wonder if the council would see it wise to remove the 10-year property tax lien increase to pay off the amount, if we're just speaking of a lower number, if maybe that's more feasible, that would save on some administration fees and free up some money to put back into our programming.
Once again, I'm assuming that would be something that could be subject, when it comes as a budget amendment, all of that is on the table. So I'm not sure if we need to do that now. I think we're just presenting alternatives. I think I'm right in that, probably. Does that make some sense?
That's an individual arrangement that can be worked out. The property owner would have the ability to pay. But if some of the processes are dictated by the Municipal Act, and providing the ability to pay over a period of time, it may be laid out in the legislation. Sorry if we were misunderstanding your question. The typical cost to a property owner would be $1,800 if there was no city contribution. And if there's 50% contribution, it'd be $900. So the table on 138, that the first column tends to lay out the different cost sharing impacts to the property owner. If that's the question.
All right, so I hope we're getting close to the end of this. Councillor Van Holst, do you have something to add?
Thank you. I was under the impression it was around $6,000. So my question then is, if there's one light every two houses, it's only on one side of the street. Is that right? And then, but people on both sides of the street would be paying the $1,800. So it'd be essentially one light for every 4 houses in that case. So maybe
Okay, can we
twice the-
get some kind of answer on that? And then hopefully we'll stop doing math and science combined, because that's very difficult for me.
So obviously and the councillor is quite correct. It is the cost with the local improvement program. It's both sides of the property, whether the streetlight is on your side or not, you still pay the same amount. So quite correct. It's 4 properties for streetlights. So, we're looking at $7,200 for the streetlight, including the underground wiring and any of the design engineering costs.
Thank you. Anything further? We have a moved and seconded amended motion. Anything further? Call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
Moving on now to item 4.2, which is the downtown OEV east-west bikeway corridor evaluation. And I note there's 3 requests for delegation. So before we get a staff presentation, perhaps is someone prepared to move that we receive the delegations? I'm assuming that would be for today, since this is matters here today. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. We'll call the vote if there's not further discussion.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
So right now we will, after the staff presentation and any technical questions, we'll have 3 delegations, one from Ms. Pastorius, one from Mr. Hall, and one from Mr. Gallagher. So they'll be speaking after the staff presentation, and the staff presentation is here, so go ahead. Sorry, I'm just going to excuse myself for 1 minute because I have to. It's nothing to do with you. It's not a protest against your presentation or anything. I'll just ask the Vice Chair to take the chair for 1 second.
Thanks. While that's going on, I'll just introduce our presenter. It's Peter Civic, who has been working hard on this project for a year now on the engineering side. At the activities in this area of the city were discussed at planning committee last night, and as discussed last night, it was an integrated process between planning and engineering, and both projects, the secondary plan and the bikeway assessment, have fed off of each other through an integrated, coordinated consultation process. So with that, Peter Civic, the transportation design engineer in transportation planning and design, will provide the presentation.
Perfect. Through the chair, thank you for allowing me to present today. As Doug mentioned, my name is Peter Civic, and I'm one of the team members for the Downtown Old East Village East-West Bikeway Corridor Evaluation. Other team members are Doug McCrae and Andrew Geeson, and our consultant for this project was WSP. This study looked at evaluating 6 alternatives through the downtown and Old East Village to determine a suitable east-west bikeway while also minimizing impacts to local neighborhoods and businesses. The study range was from Rideout Street to Quebec Street. This study would also look at improving the connection to the Thames Valley Parkway on the west, as well as connecting to existing and proposed cycling facilities on the east. When staff first started this study, we were evaluating 4 corridors, and they can be seen here on this slide. These are the 4 corridors that were brought forward to the first Public Information Center. These corridors were Dufferin Avenue, shown in green, York Street, shown in yellow, the King and Queens couplet, shown in red, with eastbound cycling on King and westbound cycling on Queens, and then the Dundas two-way unidirectional alternative, shown in blue. And two-way unidirectional just means having a cycle lane on the north and a cycle lane on the south side. From this first Public Information Center, there was a majority of stakeholders that preferred the King and Queens couplet as well as the Dundas two-way unidirectional. The King and Queens couplet was preferred mainly by the business community, and the Dundas alternative was preferred by the cycling community. As Doug mentioned, the East-West Bikeway study was consolidated with the Old East Village secondary plan process to create one cohesive consultation process so that we could get a wide range of stakeholder perspectives. Throughout the study process, there was a variety of engagements that both study teams had, which included 2 public information centers, several meetings, a walking tour, as well as weekly correspondence. From these meetings, staff incorporated comments and feedback into the study, and the evaluation criteria was refined to include these comments, and 2 additional alternatives were actually included in the study as well. And these 2 alternatives can be seen here on this slide. The first alternative is the Dundas and Queens hybrid, Old East Village couplet, shown in purple. And this is the preferred alternative that was presented or shown in the CWC report. Along Dundas Street, there will be unidirectional lanes, and then the cycling facility splits at William, with eastbound cycling on Dundas and westbound cycling on Queens. The second alternative is the Dundas Old East Village two-way bidirectional alternative, and this alternative has unidirectional cycling on Dundas from Rideout to William, and then similarly at William to Ontario, there will be a south side two-way bidirectional cycling facility. And this just means having a cycle lane for eastbound and westbound cycling on the south side. With this, we also had WSP evaluate two-way bidirectional facilities, where they were implemented, the types of streets, as well as advantages and disadvantages. From this evaluation, they noted that two-way bidirectional alternatives are typically installed on one-way streets. Also, they mentioned that two-way bidirectional facilities actually increase the amount of conflicts for both cyclists, pedestrians, and motorists, typically at intersections, loading zones, transit areas, as well as driveways. So this slide shows the 11 study criteria that were used to evaluate those 6 alternatives. They were developed from best practices in the Ontario Traffic Manual, Book 18, for cycling facilities, as well were refined from key stakeholder input. A few criteria that was refined after that initial meeting was feasibility was renamed to constructability to differentiate cost. Tree impacts was later changed to streetscaping and public realm to really show the importance of the boulevard uses and public realm. Retail economic impact was also added to show the importance of business impacts. And these criteria are very similar to the evaluation criteria used in the Colburn and Queens Avenue cycle track. They were modified slightly for the wide range of stakeholder perspectives, and some criteria that were incorporated into this study that differed from the other studies were destination access, streetscaping and public realm, social health and equity, retail economic impact, as well as on-street parking. As I mentioned, the preferred alternative is the Dundas and Queens hybrid Old East Village couplet. I just wanted to go through the route to show you what you'd expect along certain sections of this route. So along Dundas Place from Rideout to Wellington, you'll have My Dundas, which is a shared facility with cycling and commuters. And this is acceptable because of the lower traffic volumes and lower speeds. From Wellington to William, you'll have unidirectional cycling lanes. So a cycle lane on the north and a cycle lane on the south side. And the type of separation would be similar to Colburn Street, where you have the precast curbs and flexible bollards. And then at William Street to Ontario, the cycle facility splits for eastbound cycling on Dundas, which would have a raised cycle track at sidewalk level. And then westbound is on Queens. And the type of separation would be similar to Colburn with the precast curbs and flexible bollards, as well as having parking adjacent to the cycle lane and the through lane. William Street and Ontario Street would also have cycling facilities to connect between the couplet. The preferred alternative really does enhance the public realm through the constrained right-of-way in the Old East Village, which is specifically from Adelaide to Ontario, which has a narrow 20-meter right-of-way. This alternative provides a wider sidewalk, where currently the sidewalk is 3.5 meters, and we're proposing 4.4 meters, which allows opportunities for patios, merchandise displays, as well as improved streetscaping, which is important to develop a unique street. Having this wider sidewalk also allows for opportunities with loading zones, as well as bus bays at strategic locations. The next steps for our study are to report the recommendation to council, as well as this recommendation from the East-West Bikeway study and the Old East Village secondary process will help to build the infrastructure program on Dundas in 2020. And the project on Dundas is from Adelaide Street to just west of Ontario, and it's planned for construction in 2020. Even though we're wrapping up the study phase, we'll continue to engage stakeholders and their feedback throughout the design and implementation phase, and we'll continue to enhance or look at enhancing connectivity, improving connectivity to Dundas within the Old East Village. And with that, I thank you and return control to the chair.
Thank you very much. Any just technical questions at this point in time? Are there any technical questions? Then we'll hear from the delegates. As I said, this is not just so everyone's clear, this is not a public participation meeting where everyone who feels they wish to can stand up and speak. It's a delegated meeting. So we have 3 delegates who wish to speak. And the first is Ms. Pastorius, from the manager of Old East Village BIA. Welcome. We missed you last night. Happy to see you today. I should also remind the delegates you have 5 minutes, and I will let you know when you have a minute remaining in your presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jen Pastorius. I'm the manager of the Old East Village BIA. If I haven't met you before, I look forward to meeting with you soon. I'm here to speak today about the downtown OEV East-West Bikeway. I want to thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak, as well as to thank staff, Doug McCrae and Peter Civic, for their exceptional work and expertise that you've provided to the BIA through this process. There we go. The work been done on both this process and the Old East Village secondary plan has been informed by so much work that has come before it. And again, we'd like to thank city staff and council for their ongoing support of the area. There have been 2 combined community consultations held regarding East-West Bikeway and Old East Village Dundas Street Corridor secondary plan. As was mentioned last night by Councillor Helmer, thank you again for stepping in. There are benefits and challenges to this merging these consultations. In response to some of the challenges, the BIA surveyed our own members via comment card, email, and in person to better get their perspective. The discussion was robust and opinions were diverse regarding inclusion of bike lanes on Dundas. Two themes clearly emerged, however, beyond what's on these slides. First is that Oldies Village is a cycling community, and there's a lot of support around cycling and cycling infrastructure in the city and in the neighborhood. And second, the businesses who were very supportive of bike lanes, but might not have been affected by the recommended option here, being on the south side of the street, so their business being on the north. Although they supported bike lanes, they understood the anxieties that small business had on the impacts of the infrastructure that those businesses that may be losing their parking in this proposed version would have towards losing loading bays, parking, and bus bays. Whoops, wrong way. So on-street parking was one of the things that came up. On-street parking has varied value depending on who you speak to, but in Oldies Village businesses, it's very important. Currently, we have many businesses that have shared that their customers will shop dependent on finding a space on the corridor, and that even though our parking lots, which are newly renovated, landscaped, and actually the least expensive in town, are still underutilized as on-street parking is preferred. Further, the businesses have spoken with me stating that they feel that it's a high prize amenity that attributes to their economic viability. Keep on going the wrong way. Street parking currently provides for 2 additional amenities on Dundas Street. The secondary lane provides opportunities for informal and formal loading, as well as for bus space. Many of our businesses sell large furniture, or large items or furniture, and they do require out of front door loading or back door loading. If there is no back door loading, the only option they have is through the front door. So some businesses that we have require loading areas out front of their businesses in order to remain viable. And also in areas that are revitalizing, we want to expand the opportunities and expand the amenities in the neighborhood while not limiting existing activities. Regarding bus bays, although bus bays are not necessarily needed along the entire corridor, located in Oldies Village is the London Intercommunity Health Centre, as well as the Centertown Seniors Housing Development. Both of those spaces have clients and residents which require additional accessibility needs for transit. So loading folks with accessibility needs on buses can take up to 5 minutes per person, and therefore a bus bay is imperative to serve these riders while keeping traffic moving along Dundas. Connectivity, conversation.
We have 1 minute
Okay.
remaining, but we'll try to be a little bit generous because it's important.
Thank you, I appreciate that. The conversation around loss of parking has stimulated a long discussion and dialogue about connectivity throughout the area. This has been desired by businesses for the community for over 10 years, specifically to north-south access points to both the parking lots and side streets. We've worked with city parking, engineering, and planning to redevelop the lots in the neighborhood. While usage definitely has increased, they are still, as I said, the least expensive, but also the most underutilized. Safe and attractive pedestrian walkways, as well as vehicle and cycling directional signage for those lots to and from Dundas will be key in providing complete and updated development in Oldies Village. If council approves the proposed recommendation here, it will be paramount that connections as well, such as secure bike facilities in the lot, be made a priority to protect all the investment that has currently been made. Effective connectivity would provide ease of access for pedestrians, cyclists, vehicles, and local and rapid transit users. Our goal through connectivity is to continue to revitalize Oldies Village as an inclusive community. The connectivity, as Peter had mentioned, landscaping, lighting, pedestrian walkways, both mid-block and end-block connections. In 10 years, since spring 2008, the Oldies Village has seen over $289 million of investment, which equates to $7 to $1 of ratio of private to public investment. The BI is solely made up of family-owned businesses and property holders who encourage and support infrastructure that supports all forms of mobility. While at the same time, we require key amenities to continue to grow and support Oldies Village's contribution to the broader London economy. Thank you.
Ms. Pastorius, now, the committee should know that you took 6 minutes, so that's, I hope you don't mind. I thought it was important to finish, but the other presenters will get the same amount of time. Thank you very much. Next is Daniel Hall, Executive Director of London Cycle Link. I also should have mentioned, and I didn't know if it would become an issue, no applause, cheering, booing, anything like that. It can be off-putting to people who are presenting. So I just asked you to extend the courtesy of, you may hear something you don't like or you don't agree with, just we won't be cheering or booing. Not that anybody would boo you, Daniel, but you know.
Well, thank you for granting me the opportunity to speak. My name is Daniel Hall, and I'm the Executive Director of London Cycle Link, a nonprofit dedicated to making London a more bike-friendly city. The East-West Bikeway is a good plan that can be made much better. Through the heart of Old East, the city's recommendation is indirect, is confusing, it neglects the reality that westbound cyclists will stay on Dundas without a bike lane, and it represents a huge missed opportunity for creating a safe and convenient connection between two major destinations. Let me offer an illustrative example. Say you bike from the university to Aeolian Hall to see a show. You hop on the Thames Valley Parkway, connect to the Dundas cycle track, and arrive safely, not having to worry about traffic. On the way home, though, if you want safe infrastructure, you must walk your bike to English Street, bike up to Queens, take Queens to William, and turn left at William across 2 lanes of fast-moving traffic to get back to Dundas to continue your journey home. You see where this falls apart? Is this our best foot forward when trying to encourage more people to ride their bike? The city has cited that the section through the heart of Old East is too narrow for bike lanes in both directions. It's narrow, yes, but really it's about priorities. They've chosen to prioritize wider sidewalks that allow more flexibility for retail displays, landscaping, and potential patios. The only difference between the city's recommendation of 1 bike lane on Dundas and our recommendation for 2-way bike lanes on Dundas is 1.2 meters of extra sidewalk. There is no change to the amount of on-street parking spaces. There is no change to the number of vehicle lanes. We can add bike lanes in both directions and still increase sidewalk width from today, just by a little less. What we're proposing is a space-efficient solution that provides direct, intuitive travel for people on bikes. Cyclists in both directions would be on the south side of Dundas or on the right side of your screen, allowing for widened sidewalks and offering people on bikes complete separation from vehicles. Our solution will attract more people to ride. If we give people a safe, convenient, and straightforward option to get between downtown and Old East, we will gain hundreds, if not thousands, of riders. In Hamilton, the 2-way cycle track on Cannon Street has seen growth from 580 to 972 riders in 2 years. In Ottawa, Laurier Ave has seen ridership increase by 330% in 5 years. Our solution is safer. Our solution provides the opportunity to bike in either direction on Dundas, protected from cars. In a 2011 study in Montreal, 2-way cycle tracks like the one pictured here had a 28% lower injury rate than comparative adjacent bike routes without infrastructure. The final safety benefit is safety in numbers. As direct and intuitive bike lanes attract more riders, it's safer for everyone. Our solution will help foster a more vibrant Old East Village. People on bikes are moving slow enough to browse the store windows and make frequent stops to shop. People on bikes mean more eyes on the street and less sidewalk cycling. In Calgary, the percentage of cyclists riding on the sidewalks decreased from 16% to 2% after cycle tracks were installed. 2-way bike lanes on the south side will also support the secondary plan that calls for high-density development on the south side of Dundas. It may be tempting to push us off as disgruntled cyclists who can't take no for an answer. After all, the consultant already evaluated the two-way solution. Let me address this head on. The consultant's scoring was used to justify their solution rather than to fairly compare options. In the safety category, they scored the two-way solution worse than their hybrid, neglecting to account for people riding westbound on Dundas without any infrastructure and in the door zone of cars. In the category of retail economic impact, the criteria reads, recognizing the importance of providing customer access by all modes of travel, this criteria assesses the overall impacts to walking, cycling, and parking access. The two-way bike solution offers much better cycling access, 2 directions versus 1, and yet scored a 2 compared with the hybrid's perfect 4. I hope this illustrates why we can't use their evaluation in good conscience. If we want to see rapid growth in the number of people cycling to make our city healthier, more sustainable, and give more choice in how we get around, then we need to make our cycling infrastructure safe, direct, and intuitive. However, if we build this hybrid half solution, we'll see only marginal gains in cycling as people choose to take the most direct and convenient option, their car. Please do not endorse the preferred hybrid option presented by the city and direct them to include a solution with two-way cycle tracks on Dundas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last delegate is Mr. Gallagher from the board chair of the London Downtown Business Association.
Thank you for hearing from me. I'm here to talk about the proposed temporary bike lanes on King Street as it affects our area of downtown from Talbot up to at least Clarence. Most of the presentation prior to this has been about the Dundas section, and we had 2 meetings with staff, and the last was January 8th, where staff presented to us a temporary lane along King, which eliminated vital parking for us in front of the key parking spaces. We like to refer to those spaces on King on the south side of the street between Talbot and Richmond as the lucky lottery spaces. Everybody coming downtown comes downtown thinking that they're going to get one of those 6 spaces. This plan had eliminated those spaces as well as loading and unloading in front of those businesses along King, which is vital to not only those businesses on the south side of King, but also to the market. The market gets quite congested with deliveries during the day. The loading zone there is often filled with 2 trucks. There are semis double parked. And the plan that we were presented with eliminated all of the parking along there on the south side of that street. What we'd like to see is a proposal that includes the bike lane on the inside of those parking spaces. And if those parking spaces could be made for non-peak hours as a temporary parking spaces. Again, our fear is that if those 6 spaces are eliminated in this plan, people just won't come downtown. Everybody comes downtown thinking they're getting those 6 spaces and then travels a block and parks, and it's not a problem. Our fear is that if those spaces aren't there, they won't come. That's it.
Thank you very much. Those are the end of the delegations. There seems to be, just so we're clear here, there's 2 distinct issues happening here today. The first is what we had, which is the old East Village plan, but we've also got this other issue on King Street. So that's I suppose, the way it's developed. So I'll turn it over to committee for, first of all, can we do questions? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I may simply be ignorant being a rookie member here, but is there a reason that we're, in terms of the bi-directional, which frankly makes a lot of sense to me, is there a reason that we've only considered it on the south side of Dundas versus the north side of Dundas? I have no idea if the north side was even considered, so can anyone answer that for me?
The two-way bi-directional cycling facility on the south side was proposed by CycleLink, and we incorporated it into the evaluation. At the crux of the issue with 2 directional cycling facilities on one side of the road is that it can be very confusing at intersections and entrances. And for example, the two examples cited in the presentation, O'Connor Street in Ottawa and Cannon Street in Hamilton, are on one-way streets. And that's actually a concept that we've considered here in London in the past. With a one-way street, a bidirectional cycling facility on one side is somewhat manageable, although there's been concerns, and the O'Connor facility in Ottawa had quite a few collisions associated with it. So that concept makes us nervous, and implementing that on a two-directional street with the traffic volumes of which they are on Dundas Street is a concept that, from a safety perspective, makes us quite reluctant.
Councillor, anything further? I'll defer to other members. All right, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. So my question through you, Mr. Chair, to our staff, is there a difference between browsing and commuting? Do we see that as a difference when we're putting these cycling lanes together? Because I can see if someone's moving slow and hoping to enjoy the environment, then you could have for instance, a stop sign on the cycle lane at every corner, because it wouldn't really matter. However, and I mean just for the cyclists, but if people are commuting and hoping to move quickly, then that's a different story. And I'm wondering, is there a difference between? I think we consider those two things differently.
Go ahead.
All travelers, motorists, cyclists, pedestrians, I think there's so many different kinds of uses that it's hard to categorize, and it's something that we think about a lot, but I don't think it's difficult to identify a route and say it's a commuter route or a local destination route. And the way our design has been evolving is to just in a general sense, to try to cater to all ages and abilities. So to make a cycling facility comfortable to users of all abilities, so that's the way that we feel, and that's the way the literature tells us that we can grow cycling in London. So instead of, that's our approach.
Do you have another question, Councillor?
Okay, if I may, through to Ms. Pastorius, just the suggestion of the two-lane cycle track. There's a lot of this that seems like a good idea. I wondered if you would comment on that idea and with respect to your members.
Thank you. And this might be something I might turn back to staff. The research that we've done, the two-way or the bidirectional leaves very little room for even a decent sized sidewalk, as well as loading areas and bus space. But again, I'd like, if staff could confirm that, that would be great.
Yeah, with the two-way bidirectional alternative, it does limit having south side loading for the business operations, as well as bus bays in those strategic operations or strategic locations that were fundamental for the business stakeholders.
Can I just make sure we're understanding? People are using the term two-way bidirectional. What is that on opposite sides of the streets, the same way side of the street?
So the two-way bidirectional is a cycle facility on the south side right now that we're talking about with cycling eastbound and westbound. The two-way unidirectional is a cycle lane on the north for westbound and a cycle lane on the south for eastbound. So it's like a multi-use path.
All right, does the committee understand that terminology? Thank you. Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So through you to staff then, or actually Ms. Pastorius may want to comment on this as well. So I'll keep you standing for a minute, Jen. And I certainly appreciate all the hard work that you've put into the OEV BIA over, well, many years. And certainly enjoy the root cellar venue and the local craft beer I can get there. That said, the unidirectional on each side of the street, the problem with that, am I understanding correctly, is that we would lose parking and loading zones on both sides And that's why that's not an option that we're looking at.
Again, I would probably
Can I
have
just
Peter speak to
caution the
that.
committee, and I think we're getting into the, we're asking technical questions of a person who's made a presentation and isn't technically comfortable, I think, answering, and I don't want to put her in that position. So you just let us know as soon as you want, you feel you're out of your depth, and we'll go from there. So can we go to staff now?
Through the chair, the three Dundas alternatives remove the same amount of parking. It's really the space that the two-way unidirectional alternative, so having the cycle lane on the north and the cycle lane on the south, it takes up more space because additional buffers for the cycle lane are required. So this is why the two-way bidirectional facility was presented, because it only requires that one buffer. So you save 0.6 to 0.7 meters.
Councillor Lewis?
So a follow-up to that then, when you are talking about buffers, so when we're talking unidirectional, you are talking about cycle lanes that would be at street level, curb separated like we have on the Colburn track, as opposed to sidewalk level?
Through the chair, for the unidirectional, from Wellington to William, it would be similar to Colburn in separation. Then from William to Ontario, they'd be raised cycle tracks, and that buffer is at the curb to protect cyclists from the dooring zone.
Just questions for now. Councillor Lehman?
To staff through the chair, when looking at the two options of keeping everything on Dundas or the other option going down to Queen, are there any changes in the number of parking spots on Dundas Street with either of those options?
Through the chair, with all Dundas Street alternatives, the parking removals are all the same. They're all similar.
Further questions? Councillor Pelosa?
Thank you. Through the chair, so my understanding, it's a proposed safe separated cycle track for the entire duration, point A to B. Following through with that, I don't know. I'll look at an honest politician. I have no idea. I guess as a driver, when I leave my house, I go to work one way, I come home the same way. Certainly hearing those concerns from our cycling advocates that we're creatures of habits and that we drive, and concerned about, could you speak more to places that would have, in regards to the Dundas two-way bi-directional Oldies Village plan, what would that be comparable to of rate of accidents that you'd be concerned with for our cyclists having with traffic when they need to leave those lanes and merge across traffic to make turns?
We don't have any statistics we can quote. We just know, and the number of examples of that situation is in Ontario is very limited. I can't think of any. I know the one presentation showed one in Montreal, but there's very few examples, and that's one of the reasons why it's pretty hard to define and unusual from a driver and cyclist expectation perspective.
Deputy Mayor Hellman?
Just a couple of questions. I know that the cross-section down near Dundas in Ontario is quite tight. Heritage property on the north side, there's heritage property on the south side. There's rapid transit plan to come through there. There's all kinds of things that are going on in the Dundas, Ontario section. And I wonder if you could describe sort of how these different options would fit in that particular part, because it seems like the most constrained part of the corridor.
So through the chair, you're certainly correct. That is a pinch point. It's a challenge for the project. We're coordinated with the bus rapid transit design team, And the project that Peter mentioned for reconstruction of Dundas Street through the Old East Village would abut that. So that project's planned to start in 2020 and likely take 2 years. And it would approach the Ontario intersection, but not extend through, because that's within the BRT limits. The way it's being managed through the design is that and this is another reason why we feel we can recommend the one direction through the Old East Village, is that we can squeeze the eastbound lane in with some minor property acquisition, but no impacts to the buildings. And this is the part of the project where the westbound extends up to the Queens Avenue corridor, because it's virtually impossible to have two directions through that pinch point, just immediately west of the Ontario Street intersection.
There's no drawing, so it's a bit hard to visualize, but I'm asking about this one because right now, the way things are planned for RT and with a cycling lane, we already have pretty significant vehicle travel in the intersection to line up the lanes. So you have to move as you're going through the intersection to stay in your lane, which is not normal, right? Normally you go through an intersection and you're going relatively straight. In this particular situation, you'll have to move a bit to the south as you're going through. And there's a shadow, I don't know what it's called, a shadow, sort of shadow box or shadow lane on the opposite side that offsets the RT infrastructure on the east side. And that's part of the issue, right? And there's only so much you can move it before you have like a really big movement in the intersection. So I know you haven't shown it on the maps, but this is where that's why I'm asking about the pinch point there, because not everything is possible there that might be possible elsewhere on Dundas. So I appreciate that. In terms of the connections on Ontario and William with the hybrid option, what is the cycling infrastructure on those two little sections there?
Through the chair, at William, it would be a separated cycling facility for northbound and southbound cycling, similar to Colburn. And currently at Ontario, there'd only be enough space to implement sharrows, which is acceptable because there's lower volumes on Ontario. Whenever there's a reconstruction on that street, we'd look to implement a separated cycling facility to be able to connect Dundas to Queens with that separated facility.
Further questions, Councillor Lehman?
Well, just a comment. Councillor Helmer brought up BRT. Here we are making decisions based on a plan for transit that we're about to go into intense discussions about. And we'll know in a relatively short period of time, 60 days, I believe, was the mayor's target. I think we should defer all of this until we are clear on where we stand with transit plans. When we're going to do it, let's do it right. And let's have diagrams that we're talking about now. We're talking about heritage properties and pinch points. I think we all want to see cyclists have a good route through downtown. Mr. Hall made a good point about having one street so that people use it all the way through. So I was inclined to kind of go that way until Councillor Helmer made a very good point about pinch points. So my thought right now is that we should look to defer any bike plans until BRT is settled one way or another.
All right, so we moved right past questions into debate. So I'll let you ask questions. From now on, we'll do questions and debate. So since it's a very uncontrollable committee, this committee, very unruly. There'll have to be motions made, but if we have more questions, that's fine, but eventually we've got to get some kind of motion on the floor, presumably after we finish questions.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have another question if I can. So the, and help me out on page 148 of our agenda shows two pictures. The pictures are good. That helps me see what we're doing. So our intention, just I mean, our intention along Dundas Street is going to be the Dundas typical. Is that where we're going to see between Wellington and Adelaide, or is it going to be the one on the bottom? Are we going to see the type on the top and the type on the bottom? And then I'd just like I'd like to ask staff to contrast those two. The one on the bottom seems preferable to me, but maybe we could have some comment.
That's a question? Do you understand that it's a question of some type? Yeah.
Through the chair, the picture on the top is the Dundas typical is from Wellington to William. And as mentioned, the type of separation would be similar to Colburn with the precast curbs and flexible bollards. And then once you approach the Old East Village from William to Ontario, you'd have a raised cycle track where the cycling facility would be at sidewalk height.
Okay, well, thank you. And is the reason we're going to put in the typical, is that all we need to do is put down we just need to put down the bollards and the dividers? Is that because it's inexpensive and easy? Or is there some reason that is preferable to the typical OEV, the bottom one, which seems like you're more connected to the cyclists are obviously in the bottom picture more connected to the local destinations.
Through the chair, so the reason we're implementing the raised cycle track throughout the Old East Village is because of the reconstruction project planned in 2020. So it's planned to use capital infrastructure, the program, to implement that type of infrastructure. The other infrastructure for cycling from Wellington to William, because it is costly to implement cycling infrastructure, the precast curbs and flexible bollards are lower cost implementation, and they provide the same separation that the raised cycle track would.
Okay, thank you. Those are great answers for me.
Any other questions at this point in time? All right, so I'm going to turn over the committee now for debate and any motions. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try and get through this as efficiently as possible. The one thing that nobody's really addressed yet is the comments that Mr. Gallagher brought forward about the King Street temporary cycle track, and I have some very serious concerns about this. It seems to have been something that was, and I mean no offense by this, but sort of slapped on by the last council at the last moment. And we have York Street undergoing sewer separation construction starting very soon. We have the second phase of my Dundas Place construction that's going to be starting in just a few weeks. And then we're going to have a 30-story build by York Development on King that is going to need to access their lot from King because York is going to have sewer separation work going on it. So we are going to be funneling traffic from Dundas and from York onto King at a time when we're also going to be having a major construction project going on at King. And then we're going to spend $600,000 to put in a temporary bike lane that we're going to take out in a couple years' time. To me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We also have, I've heard from the cycling community throughout the weekend and even into today that they want more work done on a Dundas corridor option that's viable. And, you know, it wasn't that long ago, we had an S-curve in that part of Dundas. And I think getting rid of that S-curve was a very good thing for OEV. But I also think that if we could fit an S-curve in there at some point, maybe a little creativity on how we fit bike lanes on there all the way. And I will admit, I'm a casual cyclist. I mean, I only ride when the weather's nice and I got time to kill. I'm not commuting on my bike. I'm, you know, more often than not, I'm using the Thames Valley Parkway trails. I'm not on major streets, so I'm hardly a cycling expert or a daily rider. But I certainly appreciate their desire to have safe access. And if I was cycling to the downtown, I would want to be on Dundas because that's where my destinations are going to be. That's where I'm going to stop for coffee. That's where I'm going to go to the library. And people who drive are going to take the King and Queen one-way couplets, frankly. That's what I do when I come downtown, and the parking's easier as a driver for me to take King and Queen and park off of King and Queen. So I am going to put a motion forward, and we'll see if we've got a seconder for this. And the motion is that the temporary bike lane, and I have shared this with our clerk, that the temporary bike lane for King Street scheduled for installation in 2019 be deferred, and that the matter be brought back to Civic Works for future consideration after council has made decisions regarding the rapid transit project and the downtown OEV east-west bikeway, and that the staff report on the east-west bikeway be referred back to staff for further consultation with stakeholders on a viable Dundas Street corridor solution.
That being, so you want the, just so I'm clear, you want the entire matter that we've heard about today, both parts referred back?
That's correct, and that would include a deferral of the King Street temporary bike lane installation scheduled for later this spring.
I wonder if I might, if with the committee's indulgence, did somebody, oh, Councillor Helmer, can I just ask a question of staff and then we'll, I just wanted to ask staff if there's any concerns that we should be speaking about away from this room with regard to deferring either of those projects. And if there is, then we will have to go in camera. There's a lawyer here, so I thought we would make use of you.
Yeah, through the chair, the King Street bike lane project, it originated last summer when this committee received a bunch of concerns from cyclists, and staff were directed to look at alternatives to improving the situation. King Street is very busy, and last year was the first year when transit was routed off of Dundas Street onto King and Queens in the downtown. We know that King Street is a high-volume cyclist route, and that was the origin of a lot of the concerns. So there was a report back in September and a resulting resolution to implement what was identified as an interim transitional solution with full recognition that there are future plans for King Street that would not include it. So based on that resolution, staff have been working on that project, and it's in progress, and the project has been tendered. And if there is consideration to deferring it, because we are in the tender process, we would have to.
I just want to be careful. There's a lawyer sitting behind you. Are we getting into an area that should be subject to legal advice before we go any further?
That is just what I was, yeah. Any further discussion would require the input of legal.
Council?
Yes, through the chair. If we're going to be discussing deferring the project, we'd like to, it's a matter that could pertain to solicitor-client privilege and potential litigation.
All right, so before we go, Councilor or Deputy Mayor Helmer, would you like to speak before we go in camera, or do you want to speak now? I'll leave that to you. It's like a choice thing here.
I'll go now. So I'm not going to talk about the King Street matter, perhaps after you get legal advice on that particular issue. I do want to talk about the east-west bikeway, which is what's on the agenda. And I want to emphasize that this is a really important project for this area. First of all, Dundas Street, anyone who has walked over it or driven on it in this particular section is in very rough shape. We got alligator cracking all up and down the street. It's just getting worse. It's getting to the point where it starts to deteriorate really fast. So time is of the essence in terms of reconstructing the street for any purpose. We ruined the previous plan to have east-west cycle track on Queens when we rerouted a rapid transit instead of to be on King to be in a couplet, right? So we did the couplet. I think that was a good change in the end. We did the couplet, and we had to pull back on doing the bike lanes on Queens Ave as a result. We had federal funding for that project, which we then couldn't use because now we didn't have the project anymore, and so we had to kind of push that off. And it was time-limited funding, right? So we put ourselves in a pretty tough spot. One of the happy results of that, although that was not good if you're interested in building cycling infrastructure, was that we got to look at a different alternative for the east-west connection between Old East Village and downtown. Previously, there wasn't even an idea that would come to Old East Village. And in fact, this idea is not anywhere in the cycling master plan, which we didn't approve that long ago. So now we're looking at having a good connection on Dundas Street all the way through, traveling eastbound, all the way from Wellington, and if you include the Flex Street, all the way to sort of the edge of Old East Village, which is going to be really important. In this area, like in this part of London, between 35 and 70% of people take active modes of transportation to work. So that means they're either walking or cycling or taking transit, right? Between 35 and 70% of people. So it's higher downtown, like right around Dundas and Richmond, it's around 67% of people. A lot of those people are walking. And then as you go further into all these villages, like 35, 40% of people, that's how they're getting to work. So making sure that the infrastructure is there and that it's good infrastructure for all these different modes is really important. And so I just want to emphasize that, you know, this is a tough project to figure out how we're going to divide up the right of way so that it's balanced across all the different ways people are going to use it. You know, there's lots of people walking on those sidewalks. In many cases, you're walking around big groups of people. There's a lot of pedestrians on Dundas Street in Old East Village. The cyclists right now, Dundas Street is not a good road to be cycling on. I don't cycle on it very often, and I'm a pretty confident, aggressive cyclist. Queens obviously has an existing bike lane and it's pretty well used, but it's not a protected bike lane. And that's a one-way street where people are traveling very quickly. And that's one of the reasons people are not using it, is because the speed of the cars is so high that they're not comfortable riding there without any kind of protection. So confident cyclists will ride on it, but you're not going to see a lot of parents with their kids in a trailer behind biking along Queens. So this is an important project to move forward on. We do not need to hold up all these cycling projects until we figure out all these other things. If we did that kind of approach with transportation planning, we would get nothing done, like nothing would happen. So I would really caution against referring and delaying. We've already delayed the east-west cycle track very significantly. We've now done a lot of work and engaged the community on this specific idea. People are not in agreement about how to proceed, but we do need to proceed. We can't just wait and wait and wait and not do anything. We have a limited window to reconstruct this street in 2020. We have a whole bunch of other infrastructure projects that need to go in this area at the same time, Adelaide Street grade separation, and that needs to be staged and phased appropriately. So, you know, if you're interested in minimizing the impacts on businesses, if you're interested in making sure this stuff actually works together, we need to keep on the schedule that we're on. Like, we can't start veering off of it and having big delays. With the tendering season, you only have limited windows to actually get this stuff designed and approved and tendered. And I don't want to see any more further delays, that's for sure.
Councillor, is this going to be on, if this is going to be on anything to do with the King Street issue, we're not going to do that right now because we're going to go in camera. If you're speaking to the other aspect, that's fine.
I'll take your lead.
Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on the King thing, but
We are going to get in camera advice, so probably better. All right, so was someone willing to make a motion that we go in camera to receive legal advice? The reasons will then have to be stated. Councillor Lewis is moving, seconded by Councillor Lehman. We'll need the reasons, I think, that we're going to go in camera.
Yeah, just the, yeah. A matter subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose as it relates to the implementation King Street cycling improvements, including the tendering process.
So we have a mover and seconder go into in camera for that reason. Any further discussion? Call the vote. You can vote now on the system.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
Anybody who's here, just so you understand what we're doing, we're leaving chambers to have confidential legal advice related to the proposed motion on the King Street bus route. cycle route. I can't give you an exact time that we'll be back, but I don't expect it will be overly long. So we'll be adjourning for that purpose and coming back. All right, we're back in session. So there's a motion on the floor. One thing I think we should do is, and I think it makes sense, is to separate the votes on the two referrals. There's a referral of the King Street matter, and there's a referral of the Old East Village matter. And given the comments by the deputy mayor, which I think are well taken about different projects, we'll vote on both of them, but I think we should do that separately, subject to any disagreement I hear. So we have a motion. I believe it was seconded. So any, let's have this.
No.
We don't have a seconder, so I need a seconder. Thank you. I need a seconder on Councillor Lewis's motion, which is to defer both matters.
I'll put that back up.
All right, well, because we've been out, we'll come back to the motion and we'll put it up so you can see it. And it's now up for you to see at the bottom. Is that what the motion was? Can you review that, Councillor Lewis, please? We have the motion on the floor, and we need a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Lehman. So now it's been seconded. We'll open it for discussion, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly, I appreciate Deputy Mayor Helmer's concern about delay, but, I've checked my calendar. In March, we're going to have a public participation meeting, and then we're going to have an SPPC meeting and debate, and then council's going to make some admittedly tough, but we're going to make some decisions on transit. And I think that it really is getting the cart before the horse for us to approve an east-west bicycle corridor today, not knowing necessarily which pieces, if any, of the rapid transit project are approved. When we're talking about a delay here, we're only talking about a delay of approximately 6, maybe 8 weeks. I think when we're talking about the kind of dollar values that we're proposing to spend on rapid transit, as well as the money that we're proposing to spend on the cycling lanes, I don't think that a 6 or 8 week delay is unreasonable. And I hear what people in the cycling community have said. They actually don't like the staff recommendation, and I realize that there's a split decision there. People have differences of opinion, but as I said, I'm a casual cyclist. The people who have written and emailed me, who ride their bikes every day, I really value what they've said. I value what we heard from Mr. Hall as well, and I think that it's important that we take our time to get this right. So I'm really going to encourage folks to support this deferral at this point. I don't think that we're asking people to wait a very long time. I think we're just asking for them to give us a few weeks to make sure that we get this right in a way that is going to fit not only for the cycling community, but for whatever transit measures we go ahead with as well. So that's why I'm asking folks to support this deferral.
Councillor, I'll go to the committee first, Councillor Helmer, and then anybody further from the committee? Councillor Helmer, or Deputy Mayor Helmer? Deputy Mayor, I did this with Councillor Hubert. You have to accept that sometimes I'm going to call you Councillor, sometimes I'm going to call you Deputy Mayor. I'll get one of the two right.
As long as you don't call me Josh Morgan. So I want to clarify with Councillor Lewis, because the decision that's going to be made in March is about what projects to submit for funding to other levels of government. And then we wait for an answer to come back. And so it is possible that we submit projects to the other levels of government and then we find out that yes, you can have the money, or no, you can't. And then there's design work that happens about those particular projects that will affect the cross sections of the roads that we're talking about. So at Dundas and Ontario, for example, we'll do detailed design eventually on something or not. Is the idea to hold up the cycling connection until we've done the design? Because that is what will actually affect that intersection that I brought up. None of the other stuff will. And that's years away. It's not next year. It's not this year. So if we're waiting for the detailed design work to be done on some future project that we're going to decide, we're not waiting until March. We're waiting a long time after March. So, you know, a slight delay of 1 month is one thing, but that's not when we will make a decision that actually affects this project. This project goes to the limits of what is currently planned to be rapid transit. The only impact would be at the intersection of Dundas and Ontario. So I'm not willing to wait years to get the information about what's gonna happen at an intersection to then come back to this project. So are you suggesting we wait until we make a decision about what projects to submit for funding? Or until we've done the design work so we know what's happening at the intersection?
Can I just, so if it's at all helpful, the motion says after council has made decisions regarding the rapid transit project. So you're seeking clarity on what that means, or I'm not clear?
Yes, as you know, Councillor Squire, having been on council for a long time, we make lots of decisions about different transportation projects. There's not just one decision, right? There's lots of decisions.
All right, thank you. Well, I don't want to get into cross debate, but in this case, clarification, you're fine with that?
Yes, and that's exactly why I want to respond. I want to respond for clarification's sake. In my mind, Deputy Mayor Helmer, I'm talking about when we make decisions on what projects we're going to submit for funding. Because I think if we're submitting for some sort of rapid transit that includes the King-Queen couplet, for example, I think we can reasonably proceed with making a decision on cycling, knowing that we're going to do some form of transit there. If we, however, submit no requests for funding for, you know, the eastern leg of what's currently the BRT project, for example, if we're submitting no ask for that at the end of March, then I think it changes our options around what cycling fits. If we're asking for funding, I think we have to, it's a pretty clear signal then that we need to make a decision on the cycling too. So in my mind, I'm talking about when we make decisions about what projects we submit for funding, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Further comments? Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you. I have a question through you, Mr. Chair, to our staff. So if we're considering deferring this for 6 weeks, what's the implications of that? Is there a funding request we'll miss a window for? Is there, what's the downside of that?
The most tangible impact is that the bikeway assessment schedule was set such that it informed the reconstruction project of Dundas Street through the Old East Village. That project is scheduled to begin in 2020 and likely last 2 years. And it needs to establish what sort of bike facilities are on the surface so that we can consult more and more and figure out placement of street furniture, trees, everything else. So it was sort of last minute delivery here for this bikeway assessment in order to inform that project. A referral back for further consultation will more than likely bump that project by a construction season, so by a year.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know.
Do you have something further, Councillor? No? Councillor Lehman?
Through you to the staff. So am I correct in understanding that if we delayed until for 60 days, that this would only cause the Dundas Street bikeways be delayed for less than 12 months?
I read the motion to be referred back to staff for further consultation on a viable Dundas Street corridor solution. So further consultation will likely take more by the time we consult, reevaluate, report back, that would likely be longer than 60 days. And it'll be to a time period that, yes, it will affect the design schedule. That the design of a capital project in an intense urban area like that is an involved process that is time consuming, and fundamental decisions like what the streetscape looks like need to be established in the early stages.
through you, Chair, I'm just trying to get like, I think we like the idea of bike paths going down Dundas Street, but, and we'd like to see it sooner than later, I get that. I think what my concern is that depending on transit changes, if we went down one path and we changed transit, are we gonna have to change that bike path plan because of that change in transit? Like, are we gonna just be wasting our time? Like, it's, like, I'm not clear. Let's say we approve this plan for bike paths going down Dundas Street. And we get the motion, we get the ball in motion for that. And then 60 days from now, we make changes to transit. Would that affect the plan that we just approved now?
Can you answer that? I don't want you to have to speculate. Can you answer it?
Yeah, so further consultation involves some uncertainty. But one defining factor of the bikeway assessment was the lack of connectivity of cycling on King and Queens with the BRT couplet. But even if the BRT couplet were not to go ahead, the transit rerouting onto King and Queens essentially is operating in a high frequency transit scenario that is creating the current concerns that we heard last summer. So I think it doubtful that we would change to a King and Queens scenario through the downtown.
So the only hitch is the corner that Councillor Helmer was referring to. Just want to think of how I can pose this in a question. Like if it was decided on, let's say for sake of argument, we want to go, as Mr. Hall suggested, right down Dundas Street, not jutting over. And we all agreed on that and then went ahead with that. We would get the ball in motion for the bike paths. That would go regardless of where we went on BRT, correct?
I think we would need to study that in some detail. That would involve some speculation.
Councillor Van Meerbergen, you wanted to make some comment?
Thank you, Chair. I certainly support this particular motion, but I wanted to focus more on the temporary King Street scenario. So here we are, we've got almost half of council which has changed, and I think what I'm hearing is there's a really different approach, particularly with regard to this temporary bike system on King. The fact that $600,000 would be invested in something temporary certainly concerns me. I think it would concern most taxpayers. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, and it frankly doesn't seem safe. I mean, I was approached by constituents who own some businesses along there. There really is, and we heard earlier, a lot of concern from the businesses along that point, but it's a broader concern for not just businesses, but for everyone involved, including the cyclists. So I think this really needs certainly a deferral to maybe slow this down and take another look. To put something temporary at that kind of money makes no sense.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question through you to staff then is, if we're going to have a cycle track all the way down Dundas, do we need one on King Street? Is this a redundancy that's, I mean, obviously we're responding to some concerns about being able to commute, but with this Dundas one, maybe that's sort of not necessary. So I'll ask if that's the case.
The King Street.
You need to be comfortable answering that. What I'm getting at is committee's asking for a lot of staff's opinions, and I just concerned that they may be crossing the line into things that we should decide rather than staff decide. Comfortable? I'm comfortable.
Through the chair, the King Street cycling improvements were identified as a interim transitional, so non-permanent fix, and with the evaluation of the alternatives kept cost as a key consideration and kept it minimal. It's a project that works within the curbs, uses some components that are reusable in future projects. So the bikeway assessment with the corridor on Dundas will take several years to roll out, and the King Street project improvements would serve in the interim.
That was a very helpful answer. Thank you.
Further comments or on the motions? No? Okay, maybe I'll just briefly comment just to where I am right now, because if people want me to get out of the chair, I will. But I was actually here for the decision on King Street, and the decision was made because King Street was a very busy street, and at that point in time, we knew or had assurance through vote that BRT construction was also going to be on King Street. So it was that concern for the safety, not long-term decisions, the safety of bicyclists because of the combination of BRT construction and just the general nature of King, that we were going to do those temporary lanes. So I'm very comfortable deferring that decision until we know what we're going to be doing on King Street. I've heard from many people who are making the assumption that at the end of the day, we're going to be going all the way down Dundas Street one way or another. So I'm comfortable deferring that. I'm not so comfortable deferring the other decision. I know it's a difficult decision, but I haven't quite made up my mind on that, whether that should be deferred. So at this point, I'm going to ask that they put in, that we vote separately on those two matters, and we'll see how it goes. So we'll be voting separately on the deferral of the temporary King Street build, and the other is the deferral of the other decision. Now, subject to further discussion, we'll be calling those shortly. Councillor Helmer?
Thank you. Specifically on the King Street one, I'm glad Councillor Squire brought up that we did have a discussion about this during the previous term of council, and the issue on King Street is that the transit service has been moved into the couplet, and what was a very pleasant bike lane, frankly, before transit service moved onto King Street, is not anymore. And so there are very few places, honestly, biking on the roads in London, with the exception of major arterials like Highbury or Adelaide, where I personally feel unsafe riding my bike. I'll take the lane, I'll bike in traffic. It's not that much of an obstacle for me. King Street bike lane is a dangerous place. So when you're riding along there's buses that are trying to get in front and across the bike lane. Right, this is the problem, and because the transit service has moved over there, and because we have streets in the area that are disrupted from other kinds of construction, so Dundas Place on Dundas, York Street, which we just dealt with earlier, that's going to go. Cars are detouring on there, so you've got cars that are jammed onto King Street. You've got buses that are they're in mixed traffic, and they're trying to get across into the stations. You got cyclists who are trying to navigate through King Street. It is not safe for cyclists. So yes, it's expensive. But we have to make it a safe passageway through King Street. It's temporary because King Street's going to look different in the future, and these construction pressures are going to go away in the future. And those are not BRT-related construction pressures. Those are underground infrastructure and Dundas Place construction pressures. So we'll have part of Dundas under construction for Dundas Place this summer, and we'll have York Street fully closed in different sections all summer. Right? There's major impacts. King Street is going to be just as bad as it was this year, and maybe worse than it was last year. So it is a really bad idea to pull back on doing this temporary piece. I know it sounds expensive, but it's out for tender already. It's already designed. This is the kind of back and forth decision making that can happen in government where nothing happens and bad outcomes happen. Like everything cannot be at the mercy of a discussion about rapid transit. There's things we have to do otherwise that are important and that need to happen anyway. So I would not defer this one. I think you should move forward with this one.
Anything for Councillor Van Meerberg? Go ahead.
Well, I certainly take the Deputy Mayor's point that King Street is not safe for cyclists, and that includes cyclists that are on these bike lanes. I went to refresh my view of King just the other day, midday, which I typically don't do, but I went down there. It is a hubbub. I mean, the word that comes to mind is wow. It's completely congested. You've got delivery vehicles crossing back and forth, buses coming in and out, just the general volume of traffic that's funneling through there. And then we're going to put these $600,000 bike lanes and stick people on bikes on there. I think that in and of itself is unsafe, and frankly, for a temporary structure, we should not even look at this.
I hope we're converging towards voting at some point this evening. Councillor Lewis, can I just say, if we're going to keep going over the same ground, let's not do that, with all due respect. If we have something new, then let's go. Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, Mr. Chair, and yes, Councillor Helmer, I hear what you're saying about King Street. I also heard what you said about other streets that are options, and that might include, for example, Dufferin. I think that the decision to put it on King Street was frankly a bad one, and I think it's one that needs to be deferred and looked at again. So I will leave it at that, and we'll see if we're getting close to a vote.
We're splitting the issues here. I understand the King Street issue. The other issue, are we voting for a particular, because there was some differences of whether it would be on Dundas or whether we'd have that jut out. I'm not clear what we're voting on that second issue. And didn't know if this was the right time to ask this question or wait till.
No, I can help you with that. If you, just reading it, it's being referred back to staff for further consultation on a viable Dundas Street corridor solution. Now, some people will say they've both been presented to you. You have to pick one. So it's not being referred back for awaiting a decision on rapid transit. It's being referred back for further consultation. That's what it says.
So let's say I wanted to delay the King Street portion. I understand that vote. The other thing is I'm voting not to refer back, and let's get on with it with the bike paths on Dundas. Is that correct?
Well, then you'd have to vote against this, and then we would come back to, we'd have another motion to deal with that issue. So this is to defer consideration of the entire east-west bikeway for further consultation. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little more about the Dundas Street cycle tracks. So one of my concerns is that we end up with a compromise that nobody likes. So if we're building something for the cyclists, then we should be building something that they like or think will work. And I think some of the concerns that have been brought up are significant. I think it's be much more intuitive with the multi-direction, the bi-directional, if that's what it is, the two-way on the south side. Some of the safety concerns may be a little mitigated because of the fact that the streets that somebody would turn down probably aren't that busy. So I don't think someone turning south from Dundas onto Elizabeth or onto Lyle, I don't think those are very busy streets in that section. So there seems to be a little more justification for the two-way cycle track. I like it in as much as if we put infrastructure for locking up your bike. You can lock up your bike and then go in either direction from this. So as opposed to crossing, having to go to Queen Street. If I just want to go a block west from where I'm shopping right now, then am I expected to go down to Queen Street and then down a block and then back a block again? I I can see the point that it just might not be used the way that we wanted to because of a lack of convenience. My concern then is if we put the two-way cycle track, which I think would be my intuitive preference, in there, then we're gonna have the problems with loading, and is there another solution for that? What would loading look like if we did have that cycle track? Or I guess my question to you is, why is loading gonna be different with the single lane than the double lane? Maybe that's the question I would like to see. Why is, if two lanes are bad, one lane should be bad too for bikes on the south. So why is that not the case?
Yeah, this is definitely a challenging environment, trying to divvy up the space in this narrow corridor. And maybe after I've spoken, I'll let John Fleming chime in with their perspective from the secondary plan. The two-way, the bi-directional facility with both directions of cycling on the one side of the street, it's just, there's increased conflicts. We know that is and will continue to be transit ridership, and the design will be such that transit riders, when they alight from a bus, will need to be looking for bicycles not only in one direction but also in both. At intersections, it's not a common common expectation for a driver to look for a cyclist coming the opposite way. To mitigate that, it would probably require a separate signal phase, and that would dramatically reduce the capacity on the street. And that is one concern that we heard from the businesses, that they like that Dundas is a commuter route. They feel that they get a fair bit of business from commuting traffic. So a number of concerns. Another one would be the transition at the beginning of that, like transitioning from unidirectional lanes, how you get the eastbound cyclists over onto the south side of the street. But with that, maybe I'll pass it over to John Fleming just to give some perspective from the secondary plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to point out, just emphasize that there was a discussion at Planning Committee last night with respect to the secondary plan. And that process has been very integrated with this process, looking at the cycling lanes. And the recommendation that you see here relating to the cycling lanes very much fits hand in glove with the secondary plan. And so I think the committee needs to understand that this is not an issue that's in isolation, and whatever is done with the cycling lane will have an impact on that bigger picture plan, that secondary plan. So you should know that if you are to go with 2 lanes on Dundas, that it could mean that you can't have patios, sidewalk patios. It could mean that there is a very difficult or a lack of opportunity for bus loading and unloading, as well as loading for businesses. So there's a lot that's at stake here in terms of the business activity on the streetscape. It's not as simple as just looking at the cycling lanes, and I just want to emphasize that, make sure that the committee understands that.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. And did you want to speak in Deputy Mayor? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone is as fully informed as they can be on this particular topic. So through the chair, I wonder if our staff could just clarify sort of the status of the project and who's already been hired to work on the project and the timelines that need to be met for things to actually happen on the schedule that they're on. For example, Dillon Consulting has already been hired by the city at a contract of $1 million to do the design work for this project. Like, they're already engaged by the city. So they're working on a very compressed design timeline to actually be able to deliver the construction for next year. This is what the staff were saying when they said, you know, if we delay even a little bit here, it's going to mean an entire construction cycle. And this project, it's not just bike lanes, it's sewer work underground, right? We had to do all kinds of sewer work further down on Dundas. We have to do reconstruction underground as well. There's all kinds of work that's going on here. This is just a regular road reconstruction project. While we're doing that, we're gonna deal with these other pieces of transportation infrastructure. So, especially balancing the Adelaide Street, grade separation impacts on this area. Like, this is a commercial area and a residential area. And then we have Dundas, a huge section of Dundas that's gonna be majorly impacted. I just want our staff to just comment on where we're at in terms of who's already been hired and engaged in this project. Because these delays, they kind of pile up, right? It's a cumulative thing.
Yeah, through the chair. So the bikeway corridor would be implemented through several phases. But the near-term one is the one through the Old East Village, which would be delivered in coordination with the Old East Village Dundas Street reconstruction. And that is a project driven by underground needs, but it'll also benefit the streetscape. And that's, you know, the combination of the two are why it's an involved design process. Dillon Consulting was hired in the fall. The design process is underway and discussion with stakeholders is underway. Most of the work has been focused on the underground, so the sewers, the underground services, water mains. But the guidance needs, what the streetscape looks like, and the configuration, the fundamentals of the cycling are required at this time in order to be able to further develop that, because it seems, it's an involved process. At this point, we need to know where streetlights go, and that's affected by cycling facilities, where catch basins go. So it's all tied together, and that's why a delay in the bikeway assessment would likely impact the schedule of that Dundas Street reconstruction project, which would be the first phase of the corridor.
All right. Do you have anything further, Deputy Mayor? No. Councillor Pelosa. She's going to say something new and fascinating, right?
Always. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My thoughts on this would be, we're talking about the King Street cycling lane. That wasn't even part of our package with diagrams to help us understand it. And certainly that plan has changed a lot as we talk about this road, that we're a couple here, a couple there, uncouple both. And respecting our cyclists, if the King Street, if we're just discussing paint, not all cyclists have the same aptitude for cycling or comfort with it, and we know that paint, vehicles are impervious to it. It's just a guideline really of where delivery trucks can feel free to park, it seems. As per the Dundas section, certainly looking at mobility, use of friendliness for accessibility, looking at the Dundas two-way unidirectional plan, if those cycling lanes are at the same height as the sidewalk, I'm not seeing how it would be an issue for buses. Yes, if a person's getting off or getting loaded, they'd have to divert around that person, but certainly you wouldn't be in a pit of a bike lane trying to get over a protected bike lane curb to get back in. And recognizing, we certainly, I'm sure, got most of the same emails from our cycling community about their talks with the plan, and just as they've seen cycling infrastructure rolled out in bits and pieces across the city, having heard Deputy Councillor Helmer's, whoever Jesse wants to be tonight, his plans on the great active mobility that the East End has coming into downtown, making sure that we plan correctly, understanding, yes, the concrete's alligator cracking going on, and understanding the infrastructure needs underneath, not questioning any of those and the beautification of our soft infrastructure plans, but making sure that we get it right for those pedestrians. More can come out, more can support those businesses, and the cyclists have a very clear route in and out of downtown that even if it means a couple parking spots go, that's okay, because those people are gonna be spending more than enough money to make up for it. And my concern's more focused with the pinch points that we're talking about, as those aren't friendly to cyclists. And I would just want to make sure that we make the best plan going forward to accommodate cyclists who are already some of the most vulnerable people using our infrastructure, that they're taken care of first and foremost.
Anything further? Councillor Van Holst.
Well, thank you. As often is the case for us making decisions, there's just nothing ideal. There's no ideal solution because we've got some constraint that's too great. Often the width of the road, I see that many times. However, I should ask the question because it hasn't, I don't think it's happened yet. By delaying this decision on Dundas, we may put it back a year. So we should ask, what's the impact of that? Expecting an answer that is essentially bad, but I'm going to let you, through the chair, tell us.
Through the chair, it's anticipated that bus rapid transit construction will occur on King Street, and this project was scheduled to be complete prior to that construction project interrupting the parallel route from a transportation management perspective.
Okay, thank you. Well, in light of this, I think I'll probably support then the Dundas Street design. It seems like the best compromise we have, and it's certainly something that's timely. We know that the thing that annoys people most is not when they drive and find there's construction, but when they drive and can't find a parallel route to travel on. So it seems like we do need to move forward with the Dundas portion. So, and maybe one more question regarding the Dundas Street section between Wellington and William. So perhaps staff could tell us when those cycle tracks were intended, and what's the possibility of moving that forward, a section like that?
The limitation is really the annual cycling budget that we have, and the pressures on it, and being able to fit that project in with other priorities across the city.
Okay, thank you. So it's a budget limitation, and can you give me an estimate of how much that would be? How much money we would have to find a year earlier?
The more detailed costing was going to take place after the approval of the bikeway corridor, so we would have to come back and provide that information at a future date. But as Mr. Civic has pointed out, the section from Wellington to William is designed in a cost-effective manner to try to keep costs manageable, given that there's no other reconstruction project happening. So working with the infrastructure that's there as much as possible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, hopefully we're moving towards voting on something. Anything further? There being nothing, then I think we'll call the deferral of the King Street first, and we'll do that. It is up now for voting. It is just a deferral on the temporary bike lane for King Street.
Closing the vote, motion passed 4-1.
And then the next item is the referral of the Old East plan for further consultation. Anything further on that? We'll call the vote.
The original motion or just Sean's? No, yeah, just that there. Yeah, okay. Oh, right, right. Closing the vote, motion passed 3-2, sorry.
For people who are here on that issue, this matter will be revisited at council, so there will be another vote next Tuesday. The public can't make presentations on that date, but there will be, obviously be a discussion and a further vote. Thank you very much for coming to attend, and thank you for those who made delegations. Now, moving on to the deferred matters list, I think there was one matter that staff wanted to raise with regard to that.
Through the chair, item number 9, we request a change to the deadline to the second quarter. We're still working with development services and trying to come up with preparing that report, so we'd ask for an extension. Sorry, from the first quarter to the second quarter of 2019.
Right. Is somebody prepared to move that? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. All in favor of that change to deferred matters list?
Do I need to put that in there? Oh, just make it part of the motion here. So just.
What? I understand we're going to just add that to the receiving it motion. So if somebody had something else they wanted to talk to from the deferred matters list, you can do that now.
Okay, should be.
No? Then the motion will come up for vote. What? Oh, what? Yes, Mr. McCray. You haven't worked hard enough tonight? You've got something new?
Thank you. If you'll oblige, item number 5, file number 93. The policy update is going to occur through a corporate process. So it'll be more efficient, but it'll just take some more time. So if I could get an extension of that from the first quarter to third quarter.
Is someone prepared to move that also? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. All in favor? We'll include that.
So
I think
fix it after? Yeah.
we know what we're voting on.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
And we have one more confidential matter, so I'll need a motion to go into confidential session, and we will adjourn from the meeting room. So someone prepared to make that motion? Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Lehman. And the reasons are as stated on the agenda, and we're voting.
Do I need to read that?
I don't think so. It's on the.
No, it's on the agenda.
It's on the agenda.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.